Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 16th of April of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most interesting thing the most interesting updates we received probably 5 minutes or 10 minutes before I started making this video, so I was forced to change the script as well. I was preparing for one script, I discussed, analyzed the line of combat contact, and I was almost pressed the button to start the video, and the most interesting and the most important updates were published by the Russian sources, and then I had to change the script. Today, during this video, we will talk a lot about these important updates. Before we start, I haven't adjusted the map. We will adjust this map before the morning video, and so let's discuss and let's start in details. And first, let's talk about the Sumy direction. Probably the most important, the most interesting update is that the officials of the Sumy administration are working on the issue of evacuating government agencies to the city of Romny in the Ramenskoye district of the region. So as we can see, the Ukrainians understand that most likely the Russians will continue their offensive operation, and most likely the city of Sumy either would be caught in cordon or encircled by the Russians from many directions. So that is why they start preparing strategy and tactic how to evacuate administration, government offices, papers, documents in the city by the name of Romny, which is located, as you can see, according to this map, in the most western part of the Sumy region, probably on the border with the Chernihiv region and the Poltava region. So this is what's happening right now from Ukrainian side. At the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation, and for example, today, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions on the line between the settlements of Vodolahi and Bilavody. This information, as you can see, was provided by neutral mappers as for the end of the 16th of April of 2025, without geolocations that can confirm this, or without, let's say, the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. So let's keep an eye on this direction, because we see that the dynamic in this area is very big. Almost every single day we adjust the map in the Russian favor, and we see that we are going to continue doing this. And now let's talk about the first and the most important update during the previous 24 hours. And of course, this update confirmed, let's say, about the battle for the church, for this complex. And right before, as I told you, right before we start making this video, the pro-Russian resources first reported that as a result of offensive operation, the armed force of the Russian Federation managed to establish complete control over this territory. The Ukrainians were forced to fall back, or according to some pro-Russian resources, and the group of forces of 300 soldiers were destroyed. And later, probably a minute before I pressed the record button, the Russian sources published the video with the Russian soldier on the territory of this complex. This place wasn't geolocated with the Russian soldier. Once again, we haven't added this video to map, but once again, we got a lot of updates, 5 or 10 updates about the situation in this area, that says that Ukrainians were completely defeated and destroyed on the territory of this church complex. Some of them managed to survive, and those who managed to survive retreat towards the village of Garnal, which is becoming the next battle for the, let's say, the territory of the Kursk region. So this is probably a very interesting piece of news. The Russians managed to save the church. A lot of buildings, of course, were damaged, lots of buildings were destroyed, but obviously this is not the city of Marinka or the city of Volchansk that were reduced to ruins as a result of clashes. Another important video came from this area. As you can see, we have adjusted this part as well. Today, the Ukrainian sources of the 95th Brigade published this video where we can see a lot of FPV drone attacks and a lot of FPV drone strikes on the Russian units and the Russian positions and the Russian soldiers that were attacking this forest. There was an episode how Ukrainians attacked Russian vehicle exactly in this point. Most likely, the Russians came to this forest. The Russians landed infantry. The infantry began clearing this part of the forest while the Ukrainians were destroying their vehicles to reduce their possibilities for evacuation. As you can see, according to different mappers and according to different sources, this territory is considered as a gray zone or contested area. And just today, on the 16th of April, we start receiving first videos and first geolocations that indeed confirm, or at least some control over this territory by the Russian forces. So we see that the battle for this territory of Kursk region is coming to the end, and the Russians are about to finish the battle for this territory, and then most likely the Russians will continue advancing further deep inside of the territory of Sumy with the purpose to establish control over the first settlements like Miropolye, Zaptsila, Velika Rybitsa, Magritsa, and of course the settlement of Yunakivka. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kharkiv direction. You know that we haven't talked about this territory for a very long period of time because basically we haven't received anything since the summer of 2024 when the Russians basically launched their offensive operation that led to complete destruction of the city of Volchansk. And today, as you can see, we received lots of geolocations from this area, and the geography of this locations is very interesting because if you take a look at this video, you're gonna see that during the previous several days the Russians were completely concentrated on destroying Ukrainian, let's say, pontoon bridges, river crossings, and different logistic roads that Ukrainians used to supply and support their forces on the Russian side of the river of Volcha. So this is the first video where the Russians destroyed some river crossing as a result of probably artillery strike. In this video we can see another episode, but this time the Russians were destroying engineering vehicle that Ukrainians were trying to use to build this river crossing. The Russians, as a result of several attacks, destroyed this vehicle. And a bit further in the northwestern direction, in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Mala Vovcha, we have another episode, but this time the Russians destroyed the existing river crossing or pontoon bridge, or the bridge that was created by the Ukrainians probably during the special military operation, or that existed before, or something like this. Anyway, we see what the Russians are trying to do. As for now, of course, we have two options. What is happening here? Either the Ukrainians are planning to begin their offensive operation, let's say deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation, let's say with the purpose to establish control over the settlement of Shebekina and over all these villages and settlements that are located along the river by the name of Nezhigol, or the Russians are planning to attack in this area with the purpose to establish complete control over the settlements on the territory of Ukraine that are located along the river of Volcha. So as for now, it's very difficult to understand, telling the truth, but something tells me that Ukrainians may try to attack because, for example, today we got very important update that Ukrainians finished the preparation of the first military corps based on the National Guard of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. So we got this article, this creation of the first corps of the National Guard of Ukrainian Azov has been officially announced. The corps was deployed on the basis of the 12th Special and Purpose Brigade Azov as a part of the ongoing corps reform. The following units were included in the first corps of a National Guard. We're talking about the 1st Presidential Brigade, 12th Brigade Azov, 14th Brigade Krasnaya Kalina, 15th Brigade Karadak, and 20th Operational Purpose Brigade Lubard. For example, the Russians are saying that these are completely neo-Nazi brigades of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. This is how the Russians are calling them. So this is the reason why there are very high chances that the Ukrainians would try to use these brigades on the territory of the Belgorod direction. As for now, we can't say for sure, but obviously something huge and something big is happening along the river of Volcha in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Volchansk. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kupyansk direction. We don't have lots of updates from this territory. The most interesting things are coming from the settlement of Kamenka, where the Russians continue their offensive operation, and according to different sources, by the end of the 16th of April of 2025, the Russians secured up to 40 or even 50% of the village, and the Russians continue advancing further in the northern direction. Now let's move further. As for the Borova or the Liman directions, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything. As you can see, we have two important articles that were published today. The first one is the video that was published by the Russians, how they were bombing and attacking the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine between the villages of Sergeyevka and Nadia. In this video, we can see how the Russians were attacking the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine, and in the most, let's say, final part of this video, we can see how the Russians were bombing these forests with multiple launch rocket systems. Based on this video, we have adjusted these forests in the Ukrainian favor because we have at least one proof that confirms Ukrainian presence on the territory of these forests. Furthermore, today we got important article published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and the Ukrainians are saying that currently the Russians are finishing, not with this color, with the red color, sorry, that the Russians are finishing the largest regrouping since the probably 2024 on the territory of the Kupyansk region. And the sources reported that the Russians are regrouping their soldiers in the direction of this, let's say, pocket between the settlement of Boguslavka, Zagryzovo, and Kruglyakivka. So now the Russians are concentrating huge forces in this direction, and most likely the Russians indeed have some plans for this territory. Some sources reported and some analysts are saying that the Russians might try to advance in the southern direction with the purpose to attack the settlement of Borova, but other sources are saying that the Russians are planning to cross the river Voskol and to attack further in the western direction with the purpose to encircle the city of Kupyansk from the south and from the southwest. So the most important from this article is not the possible projections of Russian offensive. The most important is that the Ukrainians are saying that this is the biggest, this is a key word, the biggest regrouping of the armored force of the Russian Federation for a very, very long period of time. So obviously the Russians do have some plans for this area. Now let's talk about the Siversk direction. We have lots of very interesting details. The Russians very slowly but step by step are moving in the direction of the settlement by the name of Grigorovka. Today we have additional changes on the ground based on the different neutral mappers, and we have several geolocations where we can see how the Russians continue bombing and attacking the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine on the way how the Russians are going to attack. So we believe that maybe in 2 weeks the Russians will finish the battle for the village. Basically nothing left from the settlement of Grigorovka, just ruins, but this is very important key region before the beginning of Russian offensive operation towards the settlement by the name of Serebryanka. And if Serebryanka falls, this is going to be the beginning of complete disaster for the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory of the city by the name of Siversk. And now let's talk about probably the most important direction. We are talking about the Kostyantynivka direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation at least from 3 directions. And the second and the most important update is coming exactly from this area. This is another update that we got probably a minute before I pressed the record button, and this update is about the territory of this mine. So today we got the video on this one where we can see how the Russians were bombing the mine, and based on this video this morning we came to conclusion that the mine is still under complete Ukrainian control. But right before I started making this video, another video was published by the Ukrainian side where we could see how the Ukrainians on their FPV drones were attacking the Russian soldiers on the territory of this mine. So right before I started making this video, we got the first proof that confirms Russian control, at least partial control over this territory. During these upcoming nights of the local time, of course, we will geolocate episodes from this video. Maybe we're gonna get more points, more coordinates, and most likely tomorrow before the next update, we will color this territory completely in the Russian favor. We believe that there are still pockets of resistance and some resistance from the Ukrainian side, but we see that the Russians are tasked to finish this battle as soon as possible, because we understand that hours, minutes, or even days for the armored forces of the Russian Federation on the territory of Nilipovka are coming to an end. We understand this because this breakthrough was obviously a very special operation, but we understand that the Russians are not able to hold their positions on the territory of Nilipovka forever. Sooner or later, the Ukrainians will counterattack and they will restore control over these territories. So that is why the Russians are intensifying their attempts to attack this mine with a significant number of attacks and assault operations every single day. They need to restore this line. They need to restore, and they need to start bringing additional reinforcements to the territory of this village, which will allow the Russians to continue offensive operation in the direction of this pocket that located along the Siversk Donetsk-Donbass canal. Now let's move further and let's talk about the direction where we have the significant, now the biggest number of changes on the map. And we are going to talk about the southern Liman-Borova water reservoir direction. As you can see, we have adjusted the map. We have added additional territories into the territories of the Russian control, and we have lots of things. First of all, today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the group of forces south managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Kalynove. Based on this report published by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, we have adjusted the map and we have colored the entire settlement under complete Russian control. We believe that tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, the Russian sources will publish additional videos with the Russian flags or something like this, and then they are going to will use this information as additional proofs. Now another important video came to us to the west, from the west of Rozovka, from Alexandropol. We will not watch this video till the end. There are lots of episodes with violence, but this video confirms Russian control over this company's stronghold. Based on this video, we have adjusted this part. Furthermore, different sources like neutral mappers, like pro-Ukrainian mappers, continue adjusting their maps, showing probably significant breakthrough of the Russian forces further in the northern directions towards the village of Romanovka. So, for example, this is the situation by the end of the 15th of April of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 16th of April. So we see that the Russians managed to cut physically the road between Sukhaya Balka and the settlement of Stara Mykolaievka, and the Russians continue offensive operation further. I have just a few words about this direction, about the Ukrainian situation in this area. The front line collapsed completely without most likely any possibilities to restore control and to stabilize this situation. Furthermore, the Ukrainians, of course, they are doing some attempts to counterattack, but Ukrainians have just one chance. They are counterattacking the western flank. Today we got a lot of videos how the Ukrainians were trying to concentrate forces in the village of Malinovka, how the Ukrainians were trying to concentrate forces in the village of Tarasovka, and how the Ukrainians were trying to counterattack the Russians on the territory of Vadiana Druga, but all those attacks were repelled. The Ukrainians were attacked by the Russian FPV drones, and some attacks were completely unsuccessful. The Ukrainians shown any results. So anyway, we believe that the Ukrainians will continue, because if they can't stabilize the situation, if they can't restore control over, let's say, this territory, at least they can increase the pressure with the purpose to force the Russians to introduce additional reinforcements in this area, which will of course reduce Russian tempo during their attacks in the Liman-Borova water reservoir direction. So there are very heavy clashes, and I'll remind you that according to our understanding of this situation, we believe that this is exactly the major battle of 2025, the battle for Pokrovsk-Kostyantynivka arc. Now let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. The Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours also counter-attack in this area. They managed to enter the settlement of Pishana. The Ukrainians managed to dig in deeper between two villages of Vizdrazhenie Shevchenka, and the Ukrainians managed to enter the northern part of the settlement of Dachinsky. This offensive operation was started by the Ukrainians with the same purposes: to force the Ukrainians to redeploy some forces, at least from this area, in the direction of the southern part of Pokrovsk, with the purpose to stabilize the situation. So the Ukrainians, as you can see, are trying to counterattack on other directions with the purpose to slow down the Russians. Of course, let's wait and see what is going to be next. Most likely the Russians will be forced to bring additional troopers in this area with the purpose to stabilize the front line. Now let's move further. As for the South Donetsk direction, we see that Ukrainians began retreating. Today we got a lot of videos, lots of geolocations where we can see how the Ukrainians were moving from the settlement of Kostyantynivka in the direction of the settlement of Bogatyr. Lots of vehicles were trying to evacuate soldiers. Lots of soldiers were moving without any armor. Lots of drones. So there are a lot of things are happening here, and we understand that Ukrainians are trying to save as many as possible soldiers and units and vehicles by by retreating from this direction. We expect that the Russians are going to begin their offensive operation in this region during the next 48 hours. Furthermore, we have reports about the settlement of Shevchenka. I'll remind you that yesterday the Russians attacked this village with a significant number of vehicles. Lots of vehicles were destroyed as a result of Ukraine counterattack and counter-strike carried out by the 31st Mechanized Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine. And today we got report that most likely that Russian offensive operation was repelled by the Ukrainians. The Russians haven't managed to finish their task, and so that's why the Russians are regrouping right now, trying to find another weak points in Ukrainian defense with the purpose to resume their attempts in the very near future. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.